Plea for change. President Joe Biden outlines his plan for gun reform following a series of mass shootings. Supreme Court leak. Lawmakers confront challenges in the search for accountability. International religious freedom. The State Department issues its annual report to Congress. We have analysis. And partners in development. A Catholic sister shares her new model for ministering among the poor. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, June 3rd, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight on this feast of St. Charles, Loana, and companions. I'm Tracy Sable. President Joe Biden draws attention to two big topics. He says he knows a lot of Americans remain anxious about high prices, but he is also focused on stopping violence against children. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, good evening to you. Last night, the president talked guns, urging Congress to act. And in the speech this morning, it was all about the economy. The president saying that fighting inflation is his top economic priority. And Elon Musk's name even came up.
At the Rehoboth Beach Convention Center, President Joe Biden addresses high prices.
And look, I understand that families who are struggling probably don't care why the prices are up. They just want them to go down. Joe, what are you going to do to bring them down?
To help Americans getting hammered by high food and gas costs, he's focusing on getting other costs down.
Like their utility bills, their internet bills, their prescription drug bills, and other costs like housing.
But after his speech, the president was asked about Tesla CEO Elon Musk, who is reportedly considering laying off 10% of the company's workers and has a, quote, super bad feeling about the economy. Responding, the president pulled out a list of several companies adding jobs, including
Intel is adding 20,000 new jobs for making computer chips. You know, lots of luck on his trip to the moon.
Just hours earlier, before the speech in Delaware and in the wake of several recent shootings across the country, President Biden addressed a national audience.
We need to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And if we can't ban assault weapons, then we should raise the age to purchase them from 18 to 21. Strengthen background checks, enact safe storage law and red flag laws.
In response, the NRA writing, "We support fully funding law enforcement agencies, and we wholeheartedly support the right of any law-abiding American to defend themselves and their loved ones. What we don't support are senseless policies like no cash bail that create a revolving door justice system that only endangers good citizens."
Now, the speech on the May jobs report was the only item on the president's public schedule today. Next week, he travels to Los Angeles to attend the Summit of the Americas, and other leaders from the Western Hemisphere will be there as well. And EWTN News Nightly will be in Los Angeles covering that event. It lasts for 5 days. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, the head of the Diocese of Tulsa offers consolation to those grieving the fatal shooting in Oklahoma.
The grief that is on our hearts is heavy.
Bishop David Condola went on to say that evil does not have the power to overwhelm the community's love. He spoke during a memorial mass at the same Catholic hospital where 2 doctors and 2 others were shot to death by a man who then took his own life on Wednesday. On the investigation of the leaked Supreme Court draft opinion showing the court may overturn Roe v. Wade is ramping up. Republicans on Capitol Hill are taking steps to make sure a leak like this never happens again. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales has more.
Sources here on Capitol Hill tell me in an unprecedented move, U.S. Supreme Court law clerks are being asked to turn over their cell phone records and even sign affidavits due to the recent leak.
We don't know if they're simply asking for them. We don't know if they're asking for them upon, pain of termination. We don't know if they're seeking to subpoena them And all of those different avenues could have potentially different legal ramifications and repercussions.
Sources say clerks are so alarmed over the move, some are exploring whether to hire their own attorneys. Experts say close to 75 people could have had access to the draft opinion, which are circulated among the justices, their clerks, and key staffers. Meanwhile, a group of 12 Republicans are aiming to criminalize such leaks. They've introduced the Leaker Accountability Act, which would bar any officer or employee of the U.S. Supreme Court from, quote, knowingly publishing, divulging, disclosing, or making known in any manner confidential information. The crime is punishable up to 5 years in prison. Some legal experts argue that the leaker may have committed federal crimes already, such as embezzling federal records or obstruction of justice. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
The Biden administration is canceling $5.8 billion in student loans for those who attended Corinthian colleges. Vice President Kamala Harris announced the loan forgiveness yesterday. It was determined that Corinthian colleges had defrauded their students by misrepresenting job placement rates and engaging in false advertising. This loan discharge is the largest of its kind in the Department of Education's history. And joining us now to discuss is Angela Morabito, spokesperson for the Defense of Freedom Institute for Policy Studies and former press secretary for the U.S. Department of Education under then Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. Angela, good to see you again. Thanks for coming on. Let's talk more about this massive loan forgiveness. How significant is it, and what type of impact will it have?
This is absolutely huge, and it really shows the Biden administration's willingness to take some liberties with who should get loan forgiveness. Obviously, it was our position when I served in the Department of Ed under Secretary DeVos that if your school really defrauded you, you absolutely deserve relief. You deserve help. What the Biden administration just did isn't that. They went all the way back to 1995 and issued blanket loan forgiveness for everybody who went into those schools, whether they applied or not. So it's really kind of questionable what they're doing here, and it sends an odd message, certainly to the public and to student loan borrowers, but also to people who went to those colleges and maybe were able to get jobs and already paid off their loans. They don't get that kind of relief. Instead, it's blanket forgiveness for a specific group of people, and it certainly bodes for interesting things to come in terms of what they may do with the student loan program.
Yeah, and I understand that Vice President Kamala Harris, she actually sued Corinthian colleges while she was California's Attorney General, that is. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, it tells you that this issue started long before the Biden administration actually began, that Kamala Harris believed that there was fraud going on at Corinthian colleges, and she investigated, took a look into it. But that investigation, I believe, happened in 2013. So it's interesting to me that they went back, years and years, back to 1995 and selected that as the start date and said everybody from here on out gets blanket loan forgiveness.
And Angela, where do you think this is all going? I mean, do you think the administration will, expand this possibly to cancel all student loan debt? I mean, that's something that a number of progressive Democrats really have been pushing for.
It could happen, and this move with Corinthian colleges certainly looks like they're testing the waters for more widespread loan forgiveness going forward. And President Biden campaigned on forgiving $10,000 in student loan debt per borrower. And he talks about this in terms of equity, in terms of fairness, but there's nothing fair about forcing people to pay off loans they never took out. There's nothing equitable about taxing farmers and truckers to pay off the loans of doctors and lawyers. And this is borne out by data. When you look at who would benefit from this, loan nationalization is really what it is. Only 16% of those people are in the bottom income brackets. So this would not be benefiting the people that the Biden administration claims to be wanting to help.
Angela, not a whole lot of time left, but I'm curious, is there a better way to deal with this? I mean, could the universities themselves maybe do something, cancel the debt, or offer some type of assistance?
They can and they should. Now, the issue here is the Corinthian colleges are defunct. They're closed. But I absolutely believe in accountability for colleges, that if a college, like any other business, if they lie to their customers, they ought to be held accountable. They ought to be the ones having to make it right, rather than the federal taxpayer who had nothing to do with this.
Well, Angela, thank you so much for your time. So much more we could talk about, but unfortunately, we have to wrap it up. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Coming up, taking a closer look at the State Department's International Religious Freedom Report. Plus, the Holy Father's prayer intention for this month is close to home. Pope Francis has released his prayer intention for the month of June.
Familia es el lugar donde aprendemos a convivir.
The Holy Father says that he is praying for Christian families around the world, saying he hopes they express love for each other through concrete actions. Pope Francis also reminds us of the importance of learning from our mistakes. The message is geared toward the World Meeting of Families taking place later this month in Rome. Well, there are new developments in the ongoing Vatican trial regarding recent financial deals. This week, the focus was on Cardinal Angelo Becciu and the Holy See's investment in a luxury mansion in London. Questions were also asked about a charitable organization headed by the Cardinal's brother. Joining us now is Colm Flynn, EWTN Newsroom Correspondent. Colm, good to see you. Can you tell us more about these latest hearings?
Good evening, Tracy. Yes, I can. Well, we have been reporting on this case for some time now, what many people have labelled the Vatican trial of the century. Cardinal Angelo Becciu, once a high-ranking Vatican official, now standing trial in the Vatican for embezzlement and fraud. The controversy is centred around the purchase of a luxury London property in 2013. This was a deal that was meant to be a good investment for the Holy See, but ended up losing the Vatican over 100 million euros. Now, earlier this week, the trial continued in a Vatican courtroom where the question was asked, how much did Pope Francis himself know about this deal when it was happening, and exactly how involved was the Pope? Because up until now, Tracy, the blame has largely been laid with the disgraced Cardinal Angelo Becciu, who was working in the Vatican department, the Secretariat of State, that was responsible for this botched property deal. But the question always lingered, would others higher up at the Vatican be named? Well, this week, a man named Monsignor Mauro Carlino, he took to the stand for 8 hours to testify. He'd been working at the Secretariat of State at the time of this deal, and he claims that the Pope had always been informed each step along the way about the deal, and that the Pope wanted to save the assets at all costs. He even went as far to say that the Pope bought them all a dinner to celebrate what he thought was the conclusion and the close of the deal, when in actual fact the business deal had gone terribly wrong for the Vatican.
And Colm, remind us what was controversial about this property deal in particular.
It's extremely complicated, Tracy, but when the Vatican decided to invest in this luxurious London property, that was back in 2013, which was going to be converted into apartment blocks, they did it through an Italian businessman named Raffaele Minconi. He is also on trial, and the Vatican was not planning on buying the entire building, but shares in the building. So they were investing along with others. Then when the investment didn't seem to be going as the Vatican had hoped, and it started to become apparent that they were beginning to lose some of their original investment in the fund, the Vatican decided they would look for an exit strategy. They wanted to get out from this Italian businessman's fund, but still have a way of owning their share in the London property after they'd invested so much. That's when another Italian businessman came into the picture who helped the Vatican get out of that fund by buying more shares in the building and setting up a new company to manage it. But then this new businessman, he charged the Vatican 15 million euros just to have control of their own management company. The Vatican is now saying that was extortion. He is saying it's a misunderstanding. Now, this was going on for years when eventually in 2018, a red flag was waved when Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who is the head of the Secretariat of State, he wrote to the Vatican Bank requesting a loan of a further 150 million euro to finalise the investment. That request was approved at first, but ultimately it was blocked. In the end, the Vatican lost in the region of 100 million euros, and those two Italian businessmen I mentioned made huge profits. So, Tracy, the question at the centre of this trial really is, were the actions taken by Cardinal Angelo Becciu and others involved in the deal, was it incompetence and bad business, or was it something criminal and more sinister?
Well, Colm, it's a fascinating case indeed. Do you know what happens next?
Yes, well, Tracy, remember, this London property deal, it's not the only transaction and financial deal that is under the microscope in this trial. And Cardinal Angelo Becciu, he is just one of 10 facing trial. But by far, because of his position within the church at the time, the evidence that is being brought forward, and the large amount of money that was lost by the Vatican, it means that this element of the trial really is the focus. There are still more questions as to how much Pope Francis knew and approved of each step.
Okay, and we shall see what happens. Colm Flynn, EWTN Newsroom correspondent. Thank you so much. Up next, how a Catholic nun is ministering to the poor in Haiti. Plus, the tomb of the church's first beatified millennial reopens to the public. The State Department released its International Religious Freedom Report for 2021. The report contains data from nearly 200 countries and looks at countries where religious freedom is lacking, as well as countries that have seen improvement. Then joining us now is Paul Marsher, Director of the Religious Freedom Institute's South and Southeast Asia Action Team and Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute. He is also a professor at Baylor University. Paul, welcome back. Good to be with you. Give us an overview of this report. What are some of the highlights?
I think the principal highlight is this is over 2,000 pages long, so I admit I haven't read it all yet. But it is comprehensive, and the sections I have read, I would say, are pretty objective. That sometimes there's been various slants in earlier reports. So I think the main good thing here is it provides the most comprehensive survey in the world of religious freedom violations and religious freedom protections. That is its great strength. Also, the introductory remarks by Secretary of State Blinken and Ambassador at Large for Religious Freedom Hussein, I think they were very good. So for the report itself, I'm happy. My big problem is these reports tend not to go very far in the State Department. It's what the State Department does, or rather what it usually doesn't do with these reports, where the problems come in.
What about countries of particular concern? What are some of the countries there, and have you seen any new countries to that list?
They haven't. Well, Russia was added recently. The countries on that list, and these are the lists of sort of the countries which are worst for religious freedom, are the ones we would expect. China is there, Saudi Arabia is there, Iran is there, Afghanistan, and so forth. So the list largely is correct, but there's a tendency in the State Department to list the countries which we are more opposed to, or we see as enemies, or at least rivals, such as China or Afghanistan or Iran. One grave problem, I think the largest single omission, is that the State Department dropped the country of Nigeria as a country of particular concern. Nigeria was previously on the list, and earlier this year it was dropped, which would imply some improvement. And this is almost impossible to understand. You must realize that thousands of Christians are being killed in Nigeria every year. Over the last decade, we're talking about tens of thousands. In terms of death toll, this is the worst situation of religious persecution in the world. And why the State Department has dropped that, I don't know, and I haven't been able to get answers, and nor have my colleagues.
Yeah, it is very concerning, Paul. I mean, it's wonderful to have all this information available to us, but at the end of the day, what can the United States and other countries do in order to combat religious persecution?
For the government itself to raise these issues, as I mentioned, this is a pretty good survey. It's comprehensive, but this needs to become part of our regular diplomacy. The relevant ambassador, Rashad Hussein, I think is doing a very good job. But this needs to be tied in with the embassies themselves, with the ambassadors, and with the people back in the State Department, that when we address issues with China or with India, or indeed with Iran in these negotiations, to raise religious freedom issues. And this is important because people are suffering, but it's also now quite clear from many studies that when you have religious repression, you get increased conflict and instability. So it's in the US national interest also to promote religious freedom around the world. And if I may add, apart from the government, there are actions we can take. One of the things which Secretary Blinken emphasized in introducing the report, an example he took was the visit by the Holy Father, the Pope, to Iraq, as a very positive example. There are 3 paragraphs on this in his introduction. And the reaction of Iraqis, even though Pope Francis was unwell, they said he came all this way despite difficulty in walking, and he sends a message to us. So this sort of example of the outreach which can be done by the church, and which the church is doing in many places, is also very important, perhaps sometimes more important than what governments do.
Yeah, we're going to leave it right there. Paul, thank you so much for your time today and your analysis. We appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
The Kizito Family is a ministry serving the poorest of the poor in Haiti. Children in Haiti are impoverished both physically and spiritually. The Kizito Family provides children who would otherwise be living on the street with a home and a community while teaching them about the faith. And joining us now to discuss is Paesie, foundress of the Kizito Family. Sister, welcome. It's so good to be with you. Tell us, what inspired you to found this community? And also, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about the name and its meaning.
What inspired me to found a new community, the Kizito Family, are the words Jesus spoke to Mother Teresa before she began the Missionaries of Charity. She had seen a crowd of poor children in the dark, and Jesus told Mother Teresa, you see those kids, they do not love me because they do not know me. Bring my light to them. So these are the words that inspired me, because during the years I spent in Haiti, I have seen many children wandering in the streets, getting into all kinds of bad things, and I really felt that these words of Jesus applied to them. So that was really the inspiration.
And can you talk about the situation there right now in Haiti? I know the living conditions are very, very difficult for a lot of people. Can you give us a sense of what people face there?
They get up in the morning, there is no food in the house, no water to take a bath, no clean clothes because we had no money to buy a bucket of water to wash the clothes. And it's not uncommon when the mother doesn't have a single cent. I mean, it's really extreme poverty the people are facing now.
It's so hard to imagine, and it's so important that the work that you're doing there, especially with the children. Can you talk to us more about that?
When the community was founded 5 years back, in 2017, we met street boys, and we offered them to leave the street and come to a home. So some of them did, and then the home became their family. And then more and more children came to his home, and then we had to open a second and a third and a fourth. We have five homes for the children who had been on the streets. And so they live with us. They go to school outside, and this has become their family. We also created other centers, schools in the slum areas for other children who are not completely. Some are also on the streets, the ones attending the schools. Many of these children had not been going to school at all, and they are over age, so we just take them at any age they come into these schools. And the third type of centers we have are the catechism centers, like Sunday schools. We help children receive information in the faith and preparing for the sacraments. Because we also, during the years in Haiti, I realized that the poorest children do not have access to receiving the sacraments.
Well, Sister, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Thank you for all that you do. God bless you. If you're interested in donating, you can visit pidonline.org and click Sister Paesie under the special fundraisers heading. Finally tonight, the tomb of Blessed Carlo Acutis in Italy is now reopened. Blessed Carlo died as a teen of leukemia in 2006. After his beatification in October 2020, a panel covered the viewing glass at his tomb in Assisi. With its removal, Assisi's bishop hopes visitors will have a profound experience of faith and discernment as they venerate the young computer whiz. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.